Hello everybody, Mannix here. It's time for a little gun discussion video. Revolvers or semi-autos? Which ones are better for carry, for use, for general purposes overall? But first off, feel free to subscribe, hit that little bell notification if you do not want to miss weekly knife and gun videos. Now, going way back, revolvers are certainly older inventions in comparison to our semi-automatic friends on the right. Snap caps in here, 45 long Colt, Taurus Judge, Public Defender Poly. Our other candidate for the revolver right here is the Taurus 66 38 Special. These are all snap caps. Once again, I only have 6, but it takes 7. 38 Special and 357 Magnum rounds. Our first ambassador for the semi-automatics is the Glock 19 Generation 5 snap caps, 9mm. And then our beautiful Rock Island Armory 10mm FS Ultra 1911 styled gun. Revolvers go back further before the semi-automatics by a handful of decades. Much more simple designs on the revolvers. You just have a rotating cylinder right here as you pull the trigger and or hammer, depending on the gun. It both rotates the cylinder as well as pulls the hammer back and fires it. Perfectly timed, very simple, very difficult to dick up a revolver. By which I mean even very cheap revolvers often work very, very well and have very few, if any, malfunctions or failures to fire. It's a very, very simple, ingenious device. You can shoot them generally both single and double action. If the hammers are exposed anyway, same exact deal on this Taurus Judge. Double action. Pulling the trigger all the way to both rotate the cylinder as well as pull the hammer back and release it to fire the gun. Single action. Get a crisper, more clean fire right there. When you pull that hammer back, you're also doing some of the work. As you can see, you're both manually rotating the cylinder as well as cocking that trigger back. And all you need is that little bit of hair pull right there to finish the job. There's also concealed hammer revolvers out there. Handful of different variations out in existence, but generally speaking, that's how all revolvers work. Semi-automatic handguns, we have a separate piece, a magazine, that will hold the rounds, whatever they are, insert it into the firearm, pull the slide back to load it, chamber it, and now it is ready to go. That would go bang if it was a real round. Every time you fire that thing, if that were a real round, the explosion, the power from it, the energy will also blow the slide back, and in unison will chamber the next round. Fire again. Repeat. We have two separate pieces that have to communicate here. The magazine, the rounds going up on the feed ramp, as well as getting chambered into the gun all in one motion. So we're relying on the force from the blowback of the round itself when you fire it to pull the slide back to extract the spent casings, the spent shells, as well as load in the next round, all in one go. So you could say it's similar in a way to the revolver, how we have multiple pieces here communicating with each other, but the revolver is certainly, unarguably, more simple than a semi-automatic, meaning less things can go wrong, Murphy's Law. Semi-automatics of all kinds, doesn't matter who makes them, doesn't matter how much they cost, are notorious for having more malfunctions, more issues than revolvers. They certainly have considerably less reliability. Oftentimes, a cheap revolver will be more reliable than an expensive semi-automatic. There's exceptions out there, but general rule of thumb, the revolvers will fail less often because it's just so much more simple. You're not relying on the force or the blowback of the slide from the round itself, and you don't have to worry about timings with the spring and the magazine, with the timing of the shell getting spent as you fire it. There's a whole bunch of parts that have to communicate and be perfectly timed to, once after you fire the gun, to extract the spent shell and then load in the next round and then have the slide close on that all perfectly without anything getting jammed, no failures to feed, no failures to extract. There's more that has to happen with a semi-automatic for it to work properly. A revolver, on the other hand, just by the sheer design of it, as the cylinder is matched up with the trigger pull and the hammer getting released, it fires and rotates all in one go. Basically as one single system that all works in unison. Put it this way, as you're pulling the trigger or pulling the hammer back, whatever the method is you're using to fire the gun in a revolver, the cylinder cannot possibly rotate incorrectly or off time, however you want to put it, with the other parts of the mechanism, the trigger, the hammer, it all works at once, unless something inside of it broke, I suppose. But there's only one possible way a revolver can work. It all works at once in unison, as you can see right there. So unless a piece breaks, which is the same thing you could argue for a semi-automatic, anything can also break in there, you're going to be fine. We just also have to worry about the shells extracting in order for these to feed properly and continue to fire properly, so on and so forth. And then on top of all that, it's a separate piece. The magazine is yet another liability, another thing that could possibly go wrong if you get, I don't know, a poor quality one. Maybe the spring is worn in here. Maybe even the spring itself is not oiled. Maybe it's a little dry. The rounds have to go on a feed ramp and successfully, smoothly get into that chamber after kicking out the spent shell from the previous round after you fire it. Long story short, semi-autos have a lot more liabilities, a lot more things that can go wrong. They're considerably more complicated than revolvers. Revolvers, way more reliable, way more simple. When you pull the trigger, pretty much guaranteed it's going to go bang. Now, I know I just completely crapped on the semi-automatic so far, but this is where things get interesting, and this is why debate continues. And interestingly, this is why semi-automatics are basically always used amongst military and law enforcement, and revolvers typically are not nearly as much anyway. The main advantage the semi-automatics have over the revolvers is the sheer number of rounds, the capacity you get with them, and to a lesser extent, the ease of reloading. After you're done firing one of these things, as you know, extract the spent magazine, you can pop in a new one, rack that slide, now you're good to go, once again, with how many rounds you have in there. In the Glock 19's case, you have 15 rounds in the stock magazine. And of course, they sell extended magazines all over the place that go way beyond that. They go beyond double that if you want to really have it stick out there. Glock 17 holds 17 rounds, not to mention however many rounds you have. Remember, we just racked a round in that slide. This is chambered with a snap cap in there. In pretty much every single case I know of with semi-automatics, you get that +1 round. If you're not familiar, you chamber a round, so now your magazine has one less round in it. You can slip that magazine out, throw a new round in there like I just did, pop that magazine back in, and now you have however many rounds the gun takes +1. In this 1911's case, 8 +1. This Glock 19, 15 +1. So technically you actually have 16 total rounds you can have. So even in this small little gun, look at the size difference here. A little bit chunkier on our Glock right here. They're chunky handguns. But we have a double stack magazine on this guy. And overall, I still say it takes up less space. 16 total rounds, 15 +1, 7 total rounds. More than double, even if you don't load the chamber on this Glock 19 versus this Taurus 66. 5 rounds in this Taurus Judge Public Defender. It's a little bit more of a compact pistol, even though it is kind of a wide, fat dude. Fires 45 long count and 410 shotgun shells. It's certainly a lot of variety we have there, but despite this 1911 being a considerably larger handgun than our Glock right here, it only has 8 rounds in this magazine. It's a single stack magazine as opposed to a double stack magazine. Much fatter magazine on that Glock, but that means you're gonna have a wider handle. It's gonna be chunkier, could be a little bit more cumbersome. Typically, it's gonna be more heavy. The 1911 is kind of an interesting beast because of the grips on here and its overall design. It also has a very beefy wide handle, but you have this slim little magazine. Not the most efficient, but I just figured I'd use it as an example regardless. Still higher capacity than either of these revolvers anyway, but they do sell 1911 style handguns with a double stack magazine, so problem solved if that's your issue. So our semi-automatics easily win as far as capacity is concerned. There's no questions asked. They hold way more rounds than revolvers do typically. They're also faster to reload objectively. Magazines are very easy to swap out. Once you fire all your rounds in a revolver, you need to manually extract the spent shells. They don't just fly out as you fire it, which the semi-automatics do. This you have to manually extract and then manually insert the shells back in. You can get speed loaders and insert them in, and you can get really fast with those things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying revolvers are slow. What I'm saying is they're slower than semi-automatics. Yes, there's people who are champions out there. There's people who participate in gun competitions who can get lightning fast with revolvers and single action shooting. I get it. They exist. It doesn't mean it's easier to reload a revolver than a semi-automatic, no matter how good you are. Even if you have a speed loader, these are just more simple to reload, period. On top of that, we also have a higher rate of fire with semi-automatics. Pull the trigger, they'll go bang. You pull the trigger again, you pull the trigger again. They'll fire as quickly as you can pull that trigger. Revolvers, on the other hand, there's a little bit more going on here. We're also rotating that cylinder as we pull the trigger. that was me trying my hardest to fire that as fast as possible in double action. Granted, it's a very wide cylinder on this guy, so it's a bit slower than most snub-nosed revolvers, but single action is going to be even slower than double action, typically. Semi-automatics, as fast as you can pull the trigger, typically that's how fast they'll fire. With the revolvers, speed of your trigger pull obviously matters, but there's more mechanical parts moving here. The trigger pull or the hammer pull, whatever you're doing, also has to rotate that cylinder. There's more going on here when you pull that trigger. It's objectively harder. It's a heavier trigger pull on revolvers typically. So capacity, ease of reloading, and rate of fire are semi-automatics win over the revolvers. However, revolvers win in reliability. And also having the exposed hammer on a revolver can give you a crisp, clean, sniping style fire, if you will. While a semi-automatic that does not have that option, you pretty much only have one way you can possibly fire it. Pull the trigger. You are relying on how that trigger pull is. Some are easier to pull, some have more travel to them, some are heavier. You're limited to whatever that trigger is. I love both semi-autos and revolvers. They're both gold. They both still have their place in the gun world. I don't care what anybody says. But again, in modern use, most of the time you're going to see semi-automatics. Just the sheer number of rounds you get, the high capacity, the number of bullets, the number of projectiles you get to fire in one go without having to reload anything. In the size you get, the package for semi-autos, it trumps the revolvers easily. But that one advantage alone of reliability that revolvers have is enough to convince many people out there, many gun enthusiasts, to go with revolvers instead of semi-automatics for carry, for defending their life. That sheer reliability they have. You pull the trigger, they will go bang. And in a life or death situation, maybe you can't risk that. I don't know. It's up to you. I'm not saying semi-automatics are not reliable. They certainly can be. But cheap semi-autos, a poorly oiled semi-auto, using a semi-auto with a cheap magazine or some no-name brand parts the gun has to communicate with, it can start to get a little iffy. Take those guns to the range, fire a whole bunch of rounds, and watch what happens. Hell, hollow points. You start firing hollow points, it becomes a whole nother ball game. The reliability on those things plummets in comparison to full metal jackets typically. With revolvers, it doesn't matter what type of ammo you fire. It doesn't matter how the tip of the projectile is, because the bullet does not have to go up a feed ramp like a semi-automatic does. It just sits nice and snugly within the cylinder, and so long as that cylinder can continue to spin properly, you'll be all set. I love both semi-automatics and revolvers. That's why I have both. I think they both have their reasons. Semi-autos, I would like to carry in really bad areas over revolvers. What if you go up against a gang that's trying to kill you? For whatever reason, if you need all those rounds, you're going up against multiple people, even just 2 people, I think I would want a semi-auto over a revolver. But if I'm not really looking for trouble, if I'm just out and about, doing my thing, enjoying my day, going out in an area that's, got a lot of working class people there, a lot of law-abiding citizens, I think I'd go with a revolver. I'll just take that reliability because ammo most likely won't be an issue, because I feel the capacity of ammo is not as big of an issue in a situation like that. So at that point, I'd rather just take the reliability. Home defense, I'd go with revolvers too, because again, usually if you're going up against an attacker in your own home, typically I think you have home advantage. I'd rather just go with something that will fire when I pull the trigger, and I don't have to worry about any of the parts not liking each other or not playing nice, or things getting jammed, worrying about failures to extract the spent shells, failures to feed, etc. But again, I love both style guns, and there's a reason they both still exist, and there's a reason we still use both of them to this day. What are your thoughts on revolvers going up against semi-autos? Are there any advantages and or disadvantages I missed in this video? What do you like to carry and why? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Mannix out.